My name is Abigail Rowe, but everyone calls me Abby. It was 1:47 in the morning when my phone lit up on the nightstand, vibrating against the wood like it couldn't wait to ruin the silence. At first, I thought it was one of those wrong number spam calls. But then I saw the name. Dad. We hadn't spoken in months. Not after the last Thanksgiving when I'd finally stopped pretending that we were a normal family. I answered on the third ring. Dad? His breathing came through uneven, like he'd been crying or running, maybe both. Abby, he said, voice cracking. It's Eli. He's in the hospital. It's bad. They say you're the only match for the transplant. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just stared at the dark ceiling, letting the weight of his words settle on me like damp air. He went on before I could speak. They tested everyone else. No one's close. You're his sister, Abby. Please, sister. That word hit me like a cold slap, because in our house, sister had always been a one-way street. I gave, Eli took. He took the attention, the love, the spotlight. And somehow, I was the one expected to keep smiling through it all. When I didn't answer, Dad's tone sharpened. Don't be heartless. He's family. I swallowed the bitter laugh that tried to rise up my throat. Family. The same family that forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. The same family that said I was too sensitive when I asked to be treated like more than an afterthought. Still, I said, okay. Not yes, just okay. Then I hung up. The room was too quiet after that. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of every small sound. The hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the ticking of the wall clock, the faint whistle of the wind outside. I sat up, pulled my knees to my chest, and stared at the glow of my phone screen until it dimmed. Your brother, he'd said. But when had Eli ever been that to me? Morning crept in slow, pale light filtering through the blinds. By 7, I was already in my car, heading down Highway 61 toward Charleston General. The road looked exactly the way it had the last time I'd driven it. Long, flat, lined with ghostly oaks hanging heavy with moss. Every mile closer to that hospital, my chest felt tighter. It wasn't just about Eli being sick. It was about everything that came before it. The years of small silences that built walls between us. Growing up, we lived in a white 2-story house just outside town. The kind of house that looked perfect from the street, but never really felt like home. After Mom died, Dad remarried so fast people whispered about it at church. Poor thing, they said. He just can't be alone. Then came Eli, the son his new wife brought into the marriage. All blonde hair and green eyes, a ready-made miracle. I was 10 when they moved in. Eli was 6. From the beginning, it was like I'd been written out of my own story. Dad hung Eli's drawings on the fridge, not mine. He bragged about Eli's trophies at work, not the piano recitals I practiced months for. And every time I spoke up, he'd smile that patient smile, the one that meant, don't make this harder than it has to be, Abby. So I learned to be quiet, to be the good one, the helper, the listener, the invisible glue that held the edges together. But you can only hold so much before you start to crack. The summer I turned 18, I got a scholarship to college in another state. Dad hugged me like it was an obligation, and Eli didn't even come to the airport. We didn't talk much after that. Holidays, a few awkward phone calls, the occasional text that started with "hope you're doing okay" and ended with "love, Dad." I always texted back, "I'm fine." I wasn't, but it felt easier to lie. When I reached the hospital, the parking lot was half empty, the air thick with the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Inside, the hallways buzzed with that sterile hum unique to hospitals, the sound of people trying to hold on. Dad was in the waiting room, hunched forward, elbows on his knees. He looked smaller than I remembered, older too. "Abby," he said when he saw me, relief washing over his face. I nodded. No hug, no small talk. "How bad?" He ran a hand over his face. "Leukemia. It's aggressive. He needs a bone marrow transplant as soon as possible." I nodded again because what else could I do? But as the nurse explained the testing process, something in her tone caught my attention. "You're O negative, right?" she asked. I frowned. "Yes." "And your brother?" "A B positive." She hesitated just long enough for it to sting. "That's unusual," she said, "but not impossible." Dad cleared his throat, cutting her off. "We'll do whatever it takes," he said. "Just tell us what to sign." But I was barely listening. My mind was already somewhere else, somewhere 16 years back. A school field trip, a fall, a small cut on my leg that needed stitches. I remembered the nurse at the clinic frowning at the chart. She'd said, almost to herself. "Are you sure your parents are who you think they are?" I'd laughed, because what else would a 16-year-old girl do when faced with a strange question like that? But now, standing under the white hospital lights, I couldn't shake the echo of it. That night, after I left the hospital, I didn't go home right away. I parked near the marsh, the same spot Mom used to take me when she needed quiet. The air smelled like salt and wet earth. I watched the moon break through the clouds, silver and tired. I thought about Eli, the golden boy with the easy smile and the life that fit him perfectly. And I thought about me, the daughter who stayed quiet because it was easier that way. The nurse's words wouldn't stop circling my head. Unusual? Not impossible. But what if it wasn't unusual at all? What if it was the truth, waiting all these years to be seen? By the time I got home, I'd made up my mind. I opened my laptop, typed private DNA testing near me, and clicked the first link that looked discreet. They didn't ask many questions. They just sent a kit. 2 swabs, 2 vials, 2 labels. Eli's hairbrush had been left on the hospital tray earlier that day. I'd slipped it into my purse without thinking. My own sample was easy. A cheek swab, a sealed envelope, a quiet whisper to myself. "If I'm going to save his life," I said softly into the dark, "I deserve to know the truth about mine." The next few days blurred together like rain sliding down a window. I went through the motions, work, grocery runs, answering emails, all while waiting for that envelope. Every sound made me flinch. The doorbell, the hum of the mail truck outside, the click of the metal box closing. I'd never realized how loud silence could be until I started listening for the truth. By the 5th day, I'd almost convinced myself I didn't care. Maybe the nurse had been mistaken. Maybe I was just looking for a reason to feel separate, to justify years of distance I'd already created. Then, that afternoon, I heard the dull thud of mail hitting the floor. A plain white envelope. No logo, no return address, just my name, printed neatly across the front. For a moment, I didn't move. It felt heavier than paper, like it contained the gravity of every quiet doubt I'd ever swallowed. I tore it open with shaking hands. 2 pages, too many scientific terms. And then, at the bottom, in bold, probability of full sibling relationship, 0%. I stared at the words until they blurred. No anger, no tears, just a strange calm, the kind that comes when the ground stops pretending to hold you. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, the letter on the table beside me, watching the streetlights flicker across the wet pavement. Dad had called me heartless for hesitating, but what do you call a man who builds his life on a lie? By morning, the decision was made. I would go see him. Not to fight, but to hear the truth from his mouth, not from a piece of paper. The drive to his house felt longer than it should have. The sky hung low, gray and heavy with the promise of rain. His house sat at the end of a gravel road lined with pecan trees. The same house I'd grown up in, the same one that never felt quite mine. I parked in the same cracked driveway, stepped out, and listened to the sound of gravel crunching beneath my shoes. Dad was on the porch, just like always. A mug of coffee in his hand, a newspaper folded beside him. He looked older, smaller somehow, like the years had been quietly pulling him inward. "Abby," he said, half standing, "didn't expect you this early." I held up the envelope. "Got my test results." His face didn't move. No surprise, no confusion. just a small exhale. "I see," he said softly. I waited for denial, for outrage, for some kind of performance, but he just looked at me, tired, resigned, like he'd been waiting for this conversation his whole life. "So," I said finally, "you knew?" He nodded once. "I did." The words landed quietly but carried the weight of a lifetime. I leaned against the porch railing, the wood rough beneath my palms. "How long?" "Since before you were born," he said. His voice didn't tremble, but his hands did. He set the mug down carefully, like it might shatter if he moved too fast. "Your mother knew, too," he added. "We both did." My throat tightened. "Then why?" "Because she loved you," he interrupted. "Because we thought if we just didn't talk about it, it wouldn't matter." "But it does matter," I said quietly. "It mattered every time you looked at him like he was a miracle and looked at me like I was an obligation." He closed his eyes. "I never meant to make you feel that way. I wanted to believe him, but belief is a fragile thing once it's been broken." "Who is he?" I asked. "Eli. Who's his father?" Dad hesitated. Then he looked out toward the yard, where the wind was tugging at the branches. "His mother was someone I loved before your mom," he said finally. "Her name was Caroline. We were young. Too young. She got pregnant, and before we could figure things out, she died in labor." He rubbed his forehead with both hands. "Your mother, God bless her. She wanted a family. She said we could raise him together. That love could start over. So we did. We never told him. We never told anyone." I stared at him, the world tilting slightly out of focus. "So all this time," I whispered, "you let me believe we were the same." He looked at me, eyes rimmed red. I thought it was kinder that way. Kinder. As if ignorance was mercy. I didn't remember leaving the porch. Suddenly I was in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The rain had started, soft at first, then harder, until the windshield was a blur of gray. I didn't turn on the wipers. I just sat there, watching the water streak down the glass like everything I'd been holding back finally found a way out. I should have felt anger, but what I felt was grief. Old, quiet grief for a life I thought I understood. That night, I pulled out an old photo album from the closet. Pages of birthdays, holidays, fake smiles, Eli at 10 blowing out candles, Dad's arm around him, proud and easy, me in the background clapping, always clapping. In one picture, I'm holding the cake. In another, I'm the one taking the photo, never in the center. Never the reason for the celebration. I closed the book, pressed my palm to the cover, and took a deep breath. Then I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked against a blank page, title, Inheritance. And I started typing, "When people talk about family, they talk about blood. But what if the blood isn't what binds you? What if it's the truth you've been running from your whole life?" I didn't know why I wrote it. Maybe because I needed the story to live somewhere outside my head. The next morning, the hospital called. Eli's condition had worsened. They asked if I was still willing to donate. I said yes. Not for him, not for Dad, but for me. Because even if they had lied to me, I wasn't going to become what they were. Someone who turned truth into silence. The surgery happened 2 days later. When I woke up, the room was dim. Rain tapped softly against the window. Dad was there, sitting beside my bed. He looked at me like he didn't know what to say. "Eli's stable," he said finally. "The doctors think he'll pull through." I nodded. "That's good." We sat in silence. No apologies, no explanations. Just two people sitting in the aftermath of a truth too heavy to fix. He reached out, hesitated, then took my hand. "I'm sorry, Abby," he said quietly, "for everything." I didn't pull away, but I didn't forgive him either. Not yet. Forgiveness is a language you relearn slowly, one word at a time. That night, after they discharged me, I stood in the parking lot watching the rain fall through the streetlight glow. I thought about Mom, the only person who ever made that house feel like home. And I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who kept clapping from the sidelines, hoping someone would turn and see her. Maybe I couldn't change what came before, but I could choose what came next. I could choose honesty. I could choose peace. And this time, I could choose myself. The days after the surgery moved like slow water, quiet, steady, impossible to rush. The doctors said I would heal quickly. They meant my body. They didn't say anything about the rest of me. I spent the first week back at my apartment watching sunlight crawl across the living room floor. The world looked the same. Coffee cups on the counter, books stacked near the couch, but everything felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry, just empty in a way that didn't hurt, like someone had finally drained the noise out of my head. On the third morning, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "It's Eli. Can I come by?" I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, "Sure." When he showed up that afternoon, he looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, paler. His hair cropped close from the hospital stay. He stood in the doorway holding a brown paper bag like a peace offering. "Brought coffee," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't know what you like, so I got one of everything." I almost laughed. That sounds about right. We sat at the table, 2 paper cups between us, and the kind of silence that carries too much history to be comfortable. He cleared his throat first. "I heard what happened." About the test, I didn't answer. I wanted to see where he'd go with it. "They told me while I was still recovering." "Dad said you didn't want me to find out that way." He gave a small, humorless smile. "Guess there's no good way, huh?" "No," I said softly. "There isn't." He stared down at his hands. "I don't remember, Mom," he said. "Not really. Just flashes. A smell, a song. Dad always said she was quiet, kind. He never mentioned anything else." He hesitated. I keep wondering if I reminded him of her. If that's why he looked at me the way he did, and maybe that's why he couldn't look at you. That last part landed like a weight between us. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't his fault, that none of it was. But the truth is complicated. It doesn't always come wrapped in forgiveness. "I don't hate you, Eli," I said finally. "I just hate what they did to us." He nodded, eyes wet but steady. "Me too." For a while, we just sat there, letting the quiet stretch. The kind of quiet that wasn't cruel this time. It just was. Before he left, he reached into the bag and pulled out a small envelope. "Dad asked me to give you this." I almost didn't take it, but curiosity is a stubborn thing. After he left, I sat on the couch, holding it between my fingers like it might burn. Inside was a letter. Handwritten, uneven, the kind of penmanship that comes from shaking hands. "Abby, I don't expect forgiveness. I know what I took from you. The truth, the chance to feel chosen. I thought I was protecting you. Maybe I was just protecting myself. If you can find it in you to visit, I'd like to see you before I leave for the cabin." Dad. The cabin. A small, weathered place near Lake Marion, where he used to take us fishing before everything got complicated. I folded the letter and stared out the window. For years, I'd built walls so tall that even honesty couldn't climb over them. But maybe some walls weren't meant to protect. Maybe they were meant to soften the fall. 2 days later, I drove out there. The road wound through pine trees and open fields, the air thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth. The cabin came into view, smaller than I remembered, the porch sagging slightly under years of storms and silence. He was sitting out front, blanket over his knees, a mug of coffee steaming beside him. When he saw my car, he didn't stand, just smiled. That tired, quiet smile that didn't ask for anything. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. Neither did I. I sat on the steps beside him. We didn't talk for a while. The lake shimmered in the distance, rippling under the wind. Finally, he said, "You remind me of your mother." I almost laughed. "That's the first time you've ever said that." He nodded. "She was stubborn. But when she loved, it was with both hands. I never deserved either of you." I looked at him, at the man who'd spent decades pretending the cracks weren't there, and for the first time, I didn't see him as a villain, just a man who made choices and couldn't live with them. "Dad," I said quietly, "I'm not angry anymore." He turned to me, surprise flickering across his face. "I'm just tired of carrying what isn't mine." He nodded, eyes glistening. "That's fair." We sat there until the sun dipped low, painting the water gold. He told me stories I'd never heard, about Mom's laugh, about the early days when money was tight and dreams were big. And for a little while, it almost felt like family again. Fragile, imperfect, but real. When I drove back home that night, the sky had cleared. The stars looked brighter than they had in years. I rolled down the window, letting the wind carry the smell of pine and lake water into the car. Sometimes forgiveness isn't a grand moment. It's quiet. It's the soft click of a door that finally closes without slamming. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from the university. I'd applied for a guest lecturer position months ago and forgotten all about it. "Congratulations," it read. "We'd be honored to have you join our spring ethics program." I laughed, not because of the job, but because of the irony. Ethics, the study of truth, choice, and consequence. Maybe that was the universe's way of handing me a mirror. On my first day back at campus, I walked past a group of students debating something near the fountain. They were loud, passionate, full of certainty. I smiled to myself. There was a time I would have envied that kind of certainty. Now I just appreciated the noise, the beautiful human noise of people still figuring life out. That evening, I stopped by the hospital one last time. Eli was sitting by the window, color back in his cheeks, a book in his lap. He grinned when he saw me. "Hey," he said, "you look like someone who finally slept." "Maybe I did," he laughed softly. "I wanted to thank you, Abby." For saving my life, I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything." "Maybe not," he said, "but I want to start over." If that's okay, I thought about it, about everything that had come before, and then I nodded. "Yeah, we can start there later." As I left the hospital, I paused by the glass doors. The reflection staring back at me didn't look broken anymore, just whole. Outside, the air smelled like fresh rain and something else. Renewal, maybe. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from the past. I was walking toward whatever came next. And that, I realized, was enough. It's strange how a year can feel both like a lifetime and a blink. When I think back to that night, the hospital lights, the DNA test, the silence that followed, it all feels distant now, like something that happened to someone else. Life has a way of softening the edges of pain if you let it. The seasons turned quietly after the surgery. Eli recovered. Dad moved out to the lake cabin for good, saying he wanted fresh air and quiet mornings. We talked sometimes. Short phone calls, letters, a few visits, the kind of fragile peace you handle gently, afraid to break it. Then, one morning in early spring, I got the call. It was Eli. His voice was calm, careful. "Abby, he's gone." In his sleep, for a moment, the words didn't register. I just sat there staring at the steam rising from my coffee. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded foreign. "Was he alone?" Eli hesitated. "No, the neighbor checked on him every morning. She said he looked peaceful." Peaceful, a word that used to sound distant. Now it felt almost merciful. 3 days later, I drove back to the cabin. The air smelled like pine and rain, just like the last time I'd been there. The porch creaked under my weight as I stepped up. Eli met me at the door. He looked older, too. Not in the way of years, but in the way grief changes people. "He left something for you," he said, handing me a small wooden box. The lid was carved with my initials, A.R. Inside, there were 3 things: a folded letter, a worn photograph, and a gold locket. I sat down on the porch steps, the same spot where we'd once talked as the sun set behind the trees. Eli sat beside me, silent. The air was thick with that stillness only loss can bring, the kind that presses down but doesn't crush. I unfolded the letter. Dad's handwriting was shaky but familiar. My Abby, if you're reading this, I've gone where words can't reach. I've had a lot of time to think out here. Too much, maybe. I used to believe silence could keep a family together, but silence is a slow poison. It eats through the walls you build to protect yourself. I know I stole your truth, and for that, I can't ask forgiveness. I only hope you'll remember me as a man who finally learned what truth costs, and who wanted, in the end, to pay it. You and Eli were my life, even if I didn't always show it right. Inside the locket is your mother's photo, the one from our first summer at the cabin. She wanted you to have it one day. Be kind to yourself, Abby, and don't spend your life clapping for people who never learned to see you. Dad. By the time I reached the last line, the words were swimming through tears. But they weren't the bitter kind. They were the kind that comes when you realize a wound has finally closed. Eli didn't speak. He didn't have to. He just reached over, placed his hand on mine, and stayed there. Two quiet survivors sitting among ghosts. After a while, I stood and walked down to the water. The lake was still, the surface glassy under the afternoon light. I could see my reflection, older, steadier, softer. I opened the locket. Inside, a faded photo. Mom laughing, wind in her hair, sunlight on her face. She looked free. I smiled. Then I whispered, "I'm okay now." And for the first time, I meant it. That evening, Eli and I went through the cabin together, sorting, boxing, remembering. He found Dad's fishing hat, the same one from our childhood trips, and laughed through tears. When the sun dipped low, we sat on the dock. The sky turned gold, then pink, then the kind of blue that makes you quiet. Eli broke the silence. "I used to envy you," he said softly. I turned, surprised. "Me? Why?" He smiled sadly. "Because Dad never had to pretend with you. You were his truth. Even when it hurt him, I didn't know what to say. So I just squeezed his shoulder and let the moment breathe." When I left the cabin the next morning, the sky was clear. I stopped at the old oak near the gate, the one we used to carve our initials into as kids. The bark was rough under my fingertips, but the letters were still there. A +E, faint but unbroken. I traced them slowly, feeling something warm settle in my chest. Not sorrow, not regret, just peace. Back in Charleston, life slipped into rhythm again. I kept teaching, writing, walking the same quiet streets I'd always walked. But now, everything felt lighter. Sometimes I'd pass the hospital and catch a glimpse of my reflection in the glass doors. Not the girl who kept clapping from the sidelines, not the daughter waiting for approval. Just me, Abigail Rowe, whole and enough. A month later, a package arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a framed photo. Eli and me, sitting on the dock that last evening, the sunset behind us. Our faces calm, not smiling, just real. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, were 4 words, "For when you forget." I hung it in my living room, right above my writing desk. Because sometimes, even after the storm has passed, you need a small reminder that you made it through. People ask me sometimes if I still talk to my family. I tell them I do, just not in the same language anymore. Now, our words sound like quiet check-ins, laughter over coffee, shared memories that no longer ache. We talk less about what happened and more about who we've become since. And maybe that's what family really is. Not the ones who share your blood, but the ones who choose to stay after everything breaks. On the anniversary of Dad's passing, I went back to the lake one more time. The cabin was still there, a little more weathered, but standing. I scattered wildflower seeds near the porch steps, the same kind Mom used to plant by the window. As I walked back to my car, I looked over my shoulder one last time. The sun hit the lake just right, turning it into a sheet of gold. I smiled and whispered into the wind, "Thank you, for the silence, for the lessons, for letting me go." The breeze carried the words away, and I knew, wherever they landed, they'd find peace, too. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that finally set us free. Abby's story reminds us that family isn't just about blood. It's about honesty, courage, and the quiet strength to forgive without forgetting. We can't rewrite the past, but we can choose how it shapes us. If you've ever carried a secret or a silence too heavy to hold, remember, the truth doesn't destroy, it reveals. And once you stand in that truth, you stop surviving your story and start living your life. Thank you for watching. If this spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, your love, your truth, your place are worth defending.